Hey folks, my name is Prateek Shah, and today we're going to talk about securing Windows in cloud with a practical approach for Cloud PCs and Cloud VDI. I lead security, privacy, compliance, and identity for Windows Cloud. And I'm today joined with David.
Hi folks, my name is David Bélanger. I work very closely with Prateek on the identity aspect specifically for our Cloud PCs and Cloud VDI offering. And I've been focusing also on our cloud native enablement. And I'll turn it back over to you, Prateek, to get us started with Microsoft Zero Trust and our investments in that space.
Thanks, David. First, let's talk about Microsoft Zero Trust. A lot of us, when we hear the term Zero Trust, start thinking about the notion of what Zero Trust really means for us, for you, for customers, for other partners. How do I specifically start thinking about giving access to the customers, providing identity-centric solution, multi-factor authentication, an end-to-end cycle for providing a security-centric platform? Well, for Microsoft, we really believe in earned trust. We really believe deeply into Microsoft's Zero Trust strategy as well as practice, where we apply the same fundamentals to every product, application, and lifecycle for a user and their devices. And so to that end, when you start looking at the Zero Trust paradigm, you start with identity and devices, which forms the anchor point of having the entry state for any user with any identities, with any devices or endpoints. All of that operationalizes as organizational policy in a lot of familiar control planes that customers have used or like to use, specifically for adjusting the fine-tuned security policies and policy evaluations in continuous format. From the security policy enforcement, we essentially get a lot of visibility with regards to the current security posture, the threat posture, also be able to automate. But what's more important is the way we apply Microsoft Zero Trust policies across the entire ecosystem, or the life cycle for that matter, for data, application, infrastructure, as well as network. Zero Trust is not just a specific product or a practice. It's an entire end-to-end phenomena for Windows in the cloud experience. Based on the Zero Trust principles that we have for Windows Cloud products, which is Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365, we have started seeing a very clear pattern from our customers and partners around secure identity, access, and data. When we start thinking about secure identity, we start really enabling the end-to-end experience for that user or that device, providing Windows experience with minimalistic risks and avoid any kind of glitches with regards to their authentication cycle, be it a smart card authentication, multi-factor authentication, web authentications, FIDO, and so forth. So with that in mind, specifically for Azure Virtual Desktop and Cloud PCs, which is Windows 365, we have had an uber focus for single sign-on and passwordless authentication. The features that you see on the slide with stars or yellow stars, as you see, are the features which are in focus areas. Very recently, we announced at Ignite the single sign-on and passwordless authentication, specifically leveraging the new protocol with our identity friends, which provides a passwordless mechanism to authenticate into FIDO as well as web authentication-based application. We've always had conditional access, but we enhance our conditional access specifically with now integrating deeply into Entra and Entra ID. Along with that, we've specifically focused on multi-factor authentication with some variations that you will be seeing very soon in future with regards to flexibility in terms of shorter multi-factor authentication cycles, as well as more flexibility using the Entra ID with hybrid AD join multi-factor authentication. Let's talk a little bit more about secure access. Access to any application and their data based on users' device management state is top priority for a lot of customers. And that is exactly where we start thinking more deeply with regards to our existing product lines for the integrations with Defender for Endpoint as well as Defender for Cloud. A lot of you are aware on how anti-malware scans work, how flexible you can do microsegmentation or workload-to-workload segmentation policies. All of those goodness come along with the existing status quo of the products with MDE, which is Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, as well as MDC, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and can be used on Windows Cloud product along the lines with Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. With the existing Windows AV, along with Defender AV, we're essentially able to also detect the more popular keylogger malware, which has been in talks recently, particularly for Cloud VDIs and Cloud PCs. If you start thinking about your grandma's PC or a BYO device or a device which is untrusted, more specifically, which allow access to corporate resources and devices and corporate assets, keyloggers could be sitting on your computer because of an access through the same computer to a gambling site or a website which is not necessarily passing through a web filters or a URL filters through your corporate policies. The keylogger detection mechanism through our Defender AV is one of the more popular ones that we have started to see. Private Link provides a very secure end-to-end private backbone where the customers can allow the user's connection to pass through Azure in a secure private link versus passing it through the common internet. And again, this provides an enhanced security mechanism specifically for an access within the Azure ecosystem. If a lot of you have heard of SASE, which is Secure Access and Service Edge model, SASE, at Microsoft, we specifically go deep into Service Edge, securing Service Edge, providing remote access for any of those VPN-less use cases, providing access to the corporate resources. Let's draw your attention specifically to secure data. Securing customers' data by design or being secure by default is one of the key ingredients for us providing a solid, robust end-to-end Microsoft Zero Trust standard. Along the same lines, with Microsoft Zero Trust, secure data on Azure Virtual Desktop's confidential VM types is one of the more important aspects that we have commonly heard. With the AMD-based processor, we allow processing of the data on the go with secure enclaves, providing an end-to-end confidential compute zone with trusted launch VMs as well, which provide VTPN or Virtual Trusted Platform modules. A lot of data protection comes in with protecting data which is sensitive with social security numbers, financial information, assets which are in your corporate environment, more specifically in your Cloud PCs or Cloud VDI environment. Our features such as screen capture protection and watermarking, which are GA now and can be easily accessed through the settings catalog on Intune, are really interesting because now you can redact and completely protect the existing asset or information, and the malware, or for that matter, a screen capture feature specifically on Windows, can be redacted and grayed out when the screen capture protection jumps in. Watermarking provides a QR code level protection, which basically means that if there are sensitive information on the important documents, if they're financially shared, if you're sharing on the screen via Teams, watermarking allows you to, again, make sure that there is clear corporate assignment as well as a stamp of approval while sharing some of those sensitive informations. I'll give you another very quick example. Once upon a time, a customer asked me, hey, I know that you can do a screen capture protection, but what about those who look over the shoulder or just turn on a phone camera and take a picture of the sensitive information from my screen within my VDI environment? For those people, watermarking comes in, again, very handy because the QR code essentially allows the blocking as well as device ID verification on where the screen capture is being taken, as well as the watermarking kicks in with regards to protecting the sensitive information. We've gotten the leverage as well as the goodness of host-based encryption, which basically means data at rest as well as data in transit, along with Microsoft Purview's managed keys, both along with Azure keys as well, is completely encrypted. That basically means any data or any communication while at rest or in transit is encrypted. We've also recently focused on a deeper integration with Purview's data loss protection, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few slides. At Microsoft, we aggregate strong security products as well as APIs and services all together. And that's why I really like to call a circle of Microsoft security aggregation. With Azure Virtual Desktop as well as Windows 365 fully integrated into Microsoft security solutions, we really start end-to-end from the identity coming in from Microsoft Identity Entra, Microsoft Purview Endpoint DLP, as well as the compliance from Microsoft's Purview and Microsoft Purview keys managed, with Microsoft Intune as a base management solution managing end-to-end Cloud PCs, and in many cases of user and device scope configurations for Azure Virtual Desktop in multi-session environment, as well as Microsoft Defender for Endpoint and Cloud, which specifically focuses on those virtual PCs, cloud PCs and virtual environment on the session host, doing anti-malware scans, as well as taking care of any of the antivirus capabilities specifically, dedicatedly, along with the tamper protection with Defender for Endpoint and Cloud. In the end, when we look at the security layers, we start looking at the aggregate model for Microsoft security, leveraging some of the goodness coming in from different services across Microsoft. Here is a specific flow that I'd love to go deep into with Microsoft Purview for DLP. You've definitely heard of data leak prevention or data loss prevention. What we've done recently with Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365 is to allow the EDLP agent to be able to be supported on the Cloud VDI and Cloud PC environment. And it just doesn't stop there. We support it through our ecosystem of partners, such as Citrix, along with some of the Amazon workspaces, if you're really using workspaces, but more specifically in-house for our Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. And it is allowed on any and every operating system, Windows 10, 11, Windows Server 2019, as well as Windows Server 2022. If there is a sensitive data which the admin can essentially classify or label within the virtual environment or within their existing supported device, any of the copy to USB, copy to printer, any of the egress points are blocked by EDLP. The sensitive data is classified even to the local drive on that specific endpoint and restricted by taking the data away using the USB or any specific I/O storage devices, and they're blocked and they're audited and monitored by the EDLP agent and sent it back to our admins for further verification and due diligence. You can even add the same information back to your SIEM and create more logging and audit information and create an end-to-end data protection and sensitive label cycle, which comes in very handy when you start doing the compliance projects. One of the recent additions with Secure Service Edge, both internet and private access, is now supported for Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. There are two specific use cases. If you start thinking about your remote work as well as the VYO scenario, you start thinking about how do you give access to the remote worker without implementing a client or an agent on their device? How do you start giving them access being in the middle, which basically means being a proxy, and then allowing access to any app resources, which is internal web app, SaaS app, or any specific Microsoft 365 application and resources without specifically creating further configuration in those BYO scenarios. Another use case that if you want to think about is a VPN-less scenario. Again, on those remote remote workers, which do not necessarily have a corporate approved laptop or a device, if you want to try and provide them access, how do you provide those access, private access as well as internet access mechanisms specifically in the BYO and untrusted environment? With the recent introduction of Secure Service Edge, both Secure Service Edge Internet Access and Secure Service Edge Private Access, we've resolved that by providing a Microsoft Global Private Wide Area Network, which essentially serves as a proxy in the middle. For Microsoft Internet Access as well as Private Access, it works again going back to the core fundamentals of Microsoft Zero Trusts, which is we least privilege access, assume breach, and we verify explicitly if the user actually has access, permissions, and privileges to use those applications, internal apps or web apps or SaaS apps. Along with that, an interesting thing to note here is with the goodness coming from Microsoft Entra ID and Microsoft Entra ecosystem, we allow for continuous access evaluation, which basically means if the user has exited out of AD sync, or if user has left the organization, if the user has kicked out for some reason due to a conditional access, such as being in a different geolocation, but suddenly showing up into an access of a private app, or if the user has an impossible travel scenario, which basically means if I'm accessing from San Jose, California, and suddenly I show up, then I'm also accessing the same app or the same cloud PC from New York. That's not possible within the space of 1 hour, is it? In any of those cases, a continuous access evaluation takes place specifically with SSE, which is Secure Service Edge, which monitors for users' access, not just from Entra's conditional access, but also from an Azure AD basis, and kicks the user out, notifying the admin. These kind of continuous evaluation allows us to implement a stronger, more robust zero trust practice across Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. Take a look at an example of Microsoft Purview with DLP. Here, as you see, that there are a bunch of IP addresses which the user was trying to copy and paste outside. Immediately, the user gets notified with an organizational policy which is blocking and not allowing if the user is trying to print, or the user is trying to copy or paste, or the user is trying to egress the data out in an email or an IO device like a USB storage. You can apply many flexible policies, fine-grained and fine-tuned based on your organizational needs or the compliance policies that has been dictated and governed by the CISO organization. Now that you've seen a bunch of our security advancements on Windows 365 as well as Azure Virtual Desktop, let's give you a little bit of a preview and action by walking you through the demo flows and giving you a taste of what really feels and looks like as an admin or a user while having some of these features. David, please take it away.
Thank you, Pratik. Now, I know a lot of you have already been using single sign-on, and I know a lot of you were really excited to see this announced at Ignite. So today what I'll do is I'll take you through a look behind the scene into exactly how single sign-on works. Now, before we brought in single sign-on, the authentication was really in two parts for both Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. The user during a connection first had to authenticate against the Azure Virtual Desktop gateway, which was Microsoft Entra ID based, and then authenticate separately to the operating system, the session host of the Cloud PC. And then that was normally supported a username and passwords or certificates like smart card. With the advent of single sign-on, one of the key changes we made was in Windows itself. We gave Windows the ability to sign a user in with a Microsoft Entra ID token directly. That enabled us to make the entire connection from the gateway to the OS and inside the session all Microsoft Entra ID based. And for that, it's easy to configure. So I will show an example here for Windows 365, how you can enable single sign-on. And it's just as simple on the Azure Virtual Desktop side, where it's a simple RDP property you can enable on your host pool. On Windows 365, an admin can go into any of their provisioning policy or create a new provisioning policy. And near the bottom where you see the join type, the network, there is a new option at the bottom of the screen that is called Use Microsoft Entra Single Sign-On. And there's a simple checkbox that can be enabled to turn on single sign-on. Now what that does for Windows 365 is it enables single sign-on for all new cloud PCs that will be created using that provisioning policy moving forward. And then after checking the box, you can save the setting and your new provisioning policy, and then that gets applied. If you have an existing provisioning policy where you wanted existing users to also receive single sign-on, once you have that provisioning policy updated with single sign-on enabled, there's a new option at the top that is called Apply Current Configuration. And we've added single sign-on as one of the configuration that can be applied to existing cloud PCs. So simply click on Apply Current Configuration, choose the option for Apply Microsoft Entra Single Sign-On Change, and click Apply. And that will then apply the setting to all of your existing cloud PCs. Take a note at the top right, there is a warning when you do this that some of the cloud PCs may need to be rebooted for the setting to be applied. Once that's done, if we move on to an example of how this looks like in the Windows client, for example, for Windows 365, if you click the Connect button, it's as simple as the fact that the user is just not being prompted for credentials. However, behind the scene, what we did is we were able to go and retrieve a new Microsoft Entra ID token for the end user. We actually came up with a slightly different type of token. It's called an RDP access token that can be used to sign the user into Windows. We now have a dedicated application in Microsoft Entra that is governing the access to the operating system itself. So you can configure specific CA and multi-factor authentication policies to that application. We generally recommend you match those to the gateway for a more consistent experience, but you can manage that directly with your CA and MFA policies. Now, I will continue the demo as with this, since one of the key part of the new single sign-on feature also brings in the ability to do passwordless authentication. Since the entire authentication is based on Microsoft Entra ID, you can use passwordless authentication. So FIDO keys, Windows Hello for Business, Microsoft Authenticator, whatever Microsoft Entra ID supports on a given platform, whether that's Mac, iOS, Android, the web client, we support all the same credential types. You can also bring in a third-party identity provider. As long as they integrate and federate with Microsoft Entra ID, you can use them to sign into Windows 365 Cloud PC or an Azure Virtual Desktop session host. And then to continue on our journey for supporting passwordless authentication all the way through, the next step is we also brought in a new feature called WebAuthn Redirection. So I am now inside the session. I've logged on from the Windows client. And then when you go to a website, for example, but you could do this also with a native application. In this case, I've got a website that allows me to test WebAuthn authentication. So I go to that website and it prompts me, I'll simulate having to re-authenticate to a website. I'm going to window the session so you can see what happens in this case. When an authentication request is triggered inside the session, for example, prompting me to authenticate using either a FIDO key or Windows Hello for Business, what happens is the web authentication request, instead of being applied directly into the session, our new RDP plugin actually detects that it's running inside a remote session and sends the request over the wire to my local machine. And then the authentication request is actually replayed directly on my local machine, allowing me to sign in with my locally attached security device or my Windows Hello for Business biometrics or PIN or any of my locally attached devices. What you can see here in the session is I'm actually able to pull the window off of the session itself just to show that it's actually running on my local machine. And from here, I'll actually, in this case, select a security key and then put in my FIDO PIN and then click OK and then touch my security device to complete the authentication. And voila, I'm actually fully logged in and I was able to complete the web authentication request that initiated inside the session. I was able to complete it on my local machine. And that completes the demo for kind of single sign-on. And on top of that, since we do transfer all of the users' MFA claims and conditional access policy claims from your Microsoft Entra ID token inside the session, for the majority of Microsoft Entra based applications inside the session, you'll get a single sign-on experience and you won't have to re-authenticate again. So moving on to our next demo, we'll talk a little bit more about Microsoft Purview Customer Key Demo. By default, in your tenant, Microsoft will issue a key, and that is the key that will be used to encrypt, for example, your session host or your cloud PC, the VHD and all that within your tenant. You do have now the ability to use your own customer key and be able to use that to encrypt your own data, all of your data, including your cloud PC within your environment. For that to function, the first thing you do, you would go into the cloud PC encryption type in your Microsoft Intune Admin Center. And by default here, I'm showing that I haven't actually uploaded a key that I can use. So in this case, I've got kind of zero customer key and all that. If you have not done that yet, you do need to go and pre-upload your keys into Azure Key Vault. And if you're not sure how to do that, you can always click on the help link at the top. You'll be walked through the steps to go and do that. And it basically onboards some of your own keys into Microsoft Key Vault. Once you've done that and then you come back, you're able to configure and say what key you actually want to use. So in this case, you would be able to click on the configure button, which will open up a side panel where you can go and choose, instead of a Microsoft managed key, in this case, you would choose your own Microsoft Purview customer key. And then when you do that, you can save the information. And then when you're completed with that, you get a confirmation and can save the settings. And when this gets applied, when you do save the settings, you'll see a quick note here that the re-encryption has been initiated. And you can see that it will now start encrypting all of your cloud PCs with the key that you've now provided in your key vault to ensure that it's the key that you've uploaded and it's not accessible directly by Microsoft. So that enables you to ensure you've got your own custom encryption on those VMs. And you can see as you go through, if there was a problem with re-encryption, let's say some of the Cloud PC either weren't available or they weren't able to be re-encrypted directly during that process, you'll actually see a little notification and you're able to just retry the encryption until all of your Cloud PCs have been switched over to using your own customer key. That completes the demo for customer key, and I'll now talk a little bit more about our next demo, which will talk about customer lockbox and how that works. Pratik already gave a high level earlier about how this works, but we'll actually go through the exact flow and what you could expect if you do turn on customer lockbox approval workflow in your environment, and then you encounter an issue and you have to contact Microsoft support to help diagnose the issue, and they need access to, let's say, one of your Cloud PCs to do some investigation, change some settings with your approval and all that. So this would all be initiated by yourself. And let's say in this case, one of your users has an issue accessing their mailbox or doing work there. So you would be able to go and submit a standard support request to Microsoft through either the Azure portal for Azure Virtual Desktop, or for, in the case for Windows 365, through the Intune portal. You open up a service request, and that service request gets sent to the Microsoft Service Engineer, who needs the information and identifies that they need access to your machine in this case. The Microsoft Service Engineer will be able to internally go into the Microsoft Lockbox experience and request elevated access into your environment and onto that Cloud PC. They're able to specify the type of access they want, how long they need access for, what tenant it's for, and the reason why, and also the support request number that is tied to this. They would then authenticate against the service to prove that they are the right support engineer. And at that point, an email would be generated and sent to their managers first to approve the request and make sure it's legitimate. So again, we need the service engineer to authenticate and then their manager to approve the request before an email is then sent to you to confirm that you are okay with that request being fulfilled and to give access to that support engineer into your environment. So here's an example of the email you would get, and then you would follow the flow by going into your Office Admin Center and accept the request. Again, you'll see the similar type of information that the support engineer has put in there, how long they're requesting access for, why they're requesting access, and you have the option to approve or deny that request before it goes through and before they get access to your environment. Again, once you finish that, then internally at Microsoft, the support engineer would get just-in-time access to your environment for the agreed upon period of time. And they will be able to then go take action after receiving a confirmation email from your side. And then they would go and during that period of time, complete the support request to enable and fix the access for that user to that mailbox where they were having an issue. And with this, that completes our demos for today. I will be turning it over back to Pratik to talk a little bit more about our compliance and privacy standards. Pratik?
Thanks a lot, David. This was really helpful. With Windows and Cloud experience, we're really uber focused on the level of certifications or the highest level of certifications, compliance, privacy, and trust that we want to provide along with our products and services. Why is this important for you as customers? This ensures consistency and reliability with regards to our cloud services. So with that, thank you for your time. And in future, if you have any questions and would like to provide any feedback to us, feel free to reach out specifically directly to us with aka.ms Win365 feedback or Azure Virtual Desktop feedback. Thank you.